Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the August Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board meeting. Thank you for joining us via the City of Pittsburgh's YouTube channel. As is customary for us, we will be starting with public comment. We have one registered public commenter, Alex Jackson. Please go ahead, and you have 3 minutes to give public comment.
Thank you. My name is Alex Jackson. I'm the co-founder of the Pittsburgh chapter of Data for Black Lives, an organization that aims to use technology to make measurable improvements in the lives of Black people, and I'm also a public policy student at CMU. I'm speaking today to reaffirm the importance of accountability and transparency in this and other programs through the URA's initiatives. As you may know, the city has lost 7,000 Black residents within a 4-year time span, in part because of the lack of affordable housing. Multiple studies have shown that gentrification and segregation across race and socioeconomic lines is stark and very apparent in Pittsburgh. Although the Housing Opportunity Fund has documented their program allocations across household size and race, there has seemingly been no effort to tie these decisions to metrics that would help determine their effectiveness. For instance, I have questions on what data you do or do not have on the number of homeowners who receive HSP and later on would need those services again of other financial help, or are still ultimately being evicted. Is there any follow-up of any kind with these HSP homeowners or continued support being offered? Also, how many homes in the city are being built to house people at an AMI of 50% and below? And how is this program helping people of color access those homes? And if my questions do have answers and there is data being collected on these issues, I believe it needs to be made publicly available to ensure accountability, because effectiveness of this program is not just allocating funds equally across different demographics or even disproportionately supporting lower income residents. Effectiveness should be tied to equality of outcomes measured over time, because fair housing should mean fair housing outcomes. In the 2019 report, what was clear to me is that most Black residents are receiving HSP, but not the vast majority of funds going towards down payments or home improvements, which is instead going to middle-class white residents. And there is no clear support or pathway for Black home ownership outlined. We must ask deeper questions about how this program can help Black residents in the city own and improve their homes and not simply avoid being removed from them on a short-term basis. And I urge this advisory board to link those questions with meaningful data collection and analysis to see what is working and what is not when it comes to lessening the flow of Black residents out of our city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. And later in the meeting, you will see an update on our public report, which is accessible online, our annual report that does have demographic and a lot of this information that was requested. Okay, moving on. Let's call roll. Lena Andrews.
Here.
Jamel Bay.
Present.
Joanna Deming.
Present.
Knowledge Phillip Hudson.
Present.
Jerome Jackson. Not here. Ethel Johnson. Not here. Teresa Carroll Smith. Not here. Majestic Lane. Not here. Mark Masterson.
Present.
Sonia Tillman. Derek Tillman. Diamante Walker.
Present.
Adrian Wanahall.
Present.
Kelly Ware Seabrun. And Megan Winters.
Present.
Okay, we have 8. We need 9 for a quorum. We'll be moving on to get a presentation from the Fair Housing, our Fair Housing partners, and after the presentation, we will check to see then if we have a quorum. So I would like to pass it over to Jay Dorn with HUD and Megan Conford-Hammond with the Fair Housing Partnership to give us a brief presentation on fair housing.
Thank you, Jessica. Let me get the screen sharing here with our PowerPoint. All right, can everybody see that?
Mhm.
So to launch into this discussion on fair housing and the Housing Opportunity Fund, I just want to go through some quick 5 minutes on the basics and background, but the scope of this presentation and conversation is really about looking at an equity lens and understanding what that means as far as the differentiation between affordable housing and fair housing as a means of understanding that simply providing affordable housing within the same framework of typical development results in maintaining and or worsening the pre-existing inequities that exist in our modern day society and then specifically here in Pittsburgh. So to just get the basics out for a quick second, on the FHP side is that we are the Fair Housing Initiative program in the city of Pittsburgh. We have been in place since 1984, spinning out of the Urban League. And recently I have been made the interim executive director following my start at FHP in 2009. And as you will see, that Jay Dorn, who was with FHP for nearly 20 years, is now at HUD FHEO. So FHP's sole mission and role, as we have made changes throughout the years, is fair housing advocacy and fair housing work. Let me see here about, here we go. And then to introduce Jay, who needs no introduction, but simply as a means of introducing Jay in his new HUD role. As you are aware that the Pittsburgh HUD FHEO office, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, which administers and oversees Fair Housing Initiative programs, and that includes FHP and other programmatic work on fair housing and equal opportunity, has been empty, in fact, in these recent years. And filling that office has begun with Jay Dorn being the head of the Pittsburgh HUD FHEO field office. And there's a process now in place to bring on additional supportive staff. So we will have that HUD presence after a few years without it, directly in downtown Pittsburgh and local in Pittsburgh as we're all in the virtual and remote space. Jay, is there anything you would like to say?
Well, hello to everybody. It's interesting to see you in a new space. Quite frankly, when we had talked for quite some time with you all about doing a presentation, I was sitting in a different seat, and so now I really, as the kind of the FHEO Pittsburgh HUD rep, you know, obviously I want to see a productive relationship where we're able to really further fair housing in the region. And so knowing FHP the way that I always have, I'm glad to see that Megan is here to speak with you all. And I think that if you continue to have a productive relationship, that FHP as our FIT partner can really help work with you all to find a better path to fair housing for all. I'll leave it there, and I'm kind of ride along for most of this, and interject only when I feel necessary.
Thanks, Jay. So to go through a 5-minute version on what the civil rights legislation and fair housing laws are, simply understand that civil rights in the United States began with the Civil Rights Act of 1866 at the end of slavery. The Fair Housing Act, as Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act, was enacted in 1968, and the last federal amendments to the Fair Housing Act was added federally in 1988. In that context, simply recognize that the Civil Rights Act of 1866 remains vibrant and in use, as you look at the fact that it has no exemptions for any racial discrimination in any contract in the United States whatsoever. To reiterate, as the Fair Housing Act as a means of housing discrimination requires that there is a protected class that's legally defined as a basis for which housing discrimination cannot occur. And so federally, we have race, color, national origin, religion, sex, and then familial status, which is both pregnancy and the presence of minor age children, as well as disability. I will point out, especially in this context of COVID-19, is that when disability was enacted in 1988, it was specifically within the definition of the law to include HIV and AIDS status as a means of understanding housing providers making factual-based determinations and not using widespread terms such or overbroad terms such as infection and contagion as a means of making determinations based off emotion, but not the facts of having HIV or an AIDS status. And I say that specifically because we are seeing such language and such concerns arising in the COVID-19 space, and working to make sure that the facts are out there for housing providers and landlords to make determinations based on facts and science, and not stereotypes and concerns that are unfounded. Additionally, disability within the Fair Housing Act includes provisions for the status of being in recovery, no longer abusing substances such as alcohol or drugs. So the Fair Housing Act and the concept of housing discrimination, simply to, I forgot, forgive me, I had an evening event last night. Simply to reiterate on the protected classes, I am proud that the city of Pittsburgh also explicitly includes sexual orientation, gender identity, status of a survivor of domestic violence. And during the pandemic, no less, the city has passed citizenship status, as well as language used and language spoken as protected classes that are specifically protected within the boundaries of the city of Pittsburgh. To again reiterate, the concepts that are within the Fair Housing Act as a means of what housing discrimination consists of. And so on that is that we have both treatment, where we are looking at the specifics of that a disparate treatment is a protected class with an act of harm as it relates to the housing and the protected class. So that is a nexus in between the identity of the person as well as the act of harm, such as eviction or different terms or different treatment as it relates to housing. Disparate impact is looking at that the rule is not explicitly regarding a protected class, but is regarding the fact that that the rule would disproportionately impact a protected class. So to that means the common example and impact in 2020 has been that if a housing provider has a overreaching and overly broad criminal history policy that says, despite any arrests, convictions, misdemeanors, felony, I don't care what, but any criminal history whatsoever is precluding access and allowance into being accepted as a tenant, then that will result in, because of the nature that our criminal justice system disproportionately arrests and convicts Black and Brown Americans, that housing will be predominantly and overwhelmingly and disproportionately white because of a overly broad policy that has a disparate impact based on race, national origin, and disability as well. Jay, before I go into the equity lens, is there anything you wanted to speak to on the act itself and the definitions and protected classes?
No, again, I think you're covering it well. I'll jump in where I think it's necessary.
Okay. So to dive into the concepts of what the pre-existing inequities are in the city of Pittsburgh, the Housing Opportunity Fund is a fantastic program designed to put that affordable housing that we know is necessary, that we know is needed, and that serves Pittsburgh as a means of maintaining socioeconomic diversity. But there's another lens that's absolutely necessary and critical, and that is recognizing the pre-existing inequities. The rising tide does not lift all boats. We have decades of proof and studies looking at the fact that straightforward addresses to poverty and to a lack of economics does not assist everybody equally, but it maintains the pre-existing inequities that we already have as a society and as a city. So simply to underscore that point and to point it out, and the biggest example of that we have within the city of Pittsburgh is last September's inequity across race and gender study, which quantified, which we all understood, we all already knew, is that Black Pittsburgh is suffering at higher rates to the point that we have lost Black residents in Pittsburgh across the past 5 years to the county. And because that is due to displacement, and that is due to the simple fact that if Black Pittsburgh, especially Black women, are to move out of the city of Pittsburgh, their quality of lives increases because of the severity of the pre-existing inequity that exists in our structure today. So what that means in a fair housing analysis and a concept of looking at how affordable housing intersects with fair housing and equity, to lay it out, this is a repetitive structure that says we have to have data. We have to have an understanding of how housing itself, as well as housing programs, how they are impacting the city with the protected classes. Who are they serving? What are the demographics of those that are served? What are the status of the protected classes of those that are served? Where is the housing? How does the housing intersect with pre-existing racial segregation, with pre-existing lack of access for families with children, with pre-existing concerns and the lack of accessible housing? The data on the upfront space is not a matter of critique, but it's a matter of understanding the impact so as to make a decision that is informative and based on data that can say, here are our clear attempts and action items that are meant to address what the data has shown to be a concern. So in short, it is the collection of the data on an upfront way as a means to understand what is occurring. The same way that the September 2019 inequity and inequality study explained what we already knew, but the data gives us a point of power in order to say, now what do we do to fix it? And that is the same analysis that we're using in housing. Collect the data, conduct an analysis of that data, specifically based on the protected classes, create actions, create a plan, create concrete ways to address it. Not that those action items will be singularly successful within a year's time. Not that those action items are the only thing possible. There are limited time and limited budget, but that the action items are informative and data driven. And then after the action items are implemented, the outcomes are made that can then look back and make a true assessment and understanding of what the impact of those decisions were in order to then repeat the process for the next round of funding. It's not meant to be critical, it's meant to be informative and data driven as a means of making concrete deliberative steps to address both the need for affordable housing as well as concrete and deliberative steps for fair housing, for equity. To explain that a bit further is to understand that affordable housing, I'm gonna have a couple slides on this just to explain it in a couple different ways, because there has been a national conversation that is getting this wrong with an understanding of affordable and fair housing. Affordable housing addresses housing based on income. There are impoverished groups of people across all protected classes. Fair housing from the 1960s with the Kerner Commission's report to Pittsburgh September 2019 inequality report to numerous other sets of data shows that systemic and historic discrimination has resulted in an additional lack of access on top of socioeconomic need for the protected classes. And so affordable housing and fair housing are separate, but overlaid and intersect with each other. And when you make an equity approach, so the formation of the Housing Opportunity Fund, already by its very nature and definition of the legislation, addresses affordable housing. So to apply an equity lens to that decision making is to address that if we don't change the way that we approach the development, if we don't change the frameworks that we use in order to make development and programmatic decisions based on equity, based on the protected classes, we will continue to perpetuate what already exists, or even worse, will deepen those pre-existing inequities. For example, in Pittsburgh, what is extremely clear amongst a series of inequities is the level of racial segregation that our city has amongst its housing, from not only neighborhood to neighborhood, but street to street. And so the critical aspect of this is to make sure that the decision-making coming out of the HOF puts a layer of equity lens to its decision-making atop the affordable housing decision-making structure. So to again embody what that means, to understand the 50 years that we have gone through since the civil rights movement in the 60s that culminated after 102 years of oppression at the end of slavery, is to understand what happened between 1963 and 1968. Now, I can spend all day talking about this. I certainly can't here. I'm happy to talk about it with anyone further. But to understand 63 to 68 is imperative. And I say that because Lyndon B. Johnson was president, and he passed both the War on Poverty and the Great Society. And he said, he specifically argued with civil rights leaders in the early 60s that the rising tide does lift all boats. He specifically argued that his War on Poverty and his Great Society would help all of America. And Malcolm X and MLK and so many others said, you are wrong. We must have additional provisions in equity lens that addresses the discrimination that Black America has faced since our inception. But we didn't see the Fair Housing Act until the end of the decade in 1968, because passing housing rights legislation was political suicide. The concept of property owners being told what to do with property was political suicide in the 60s. And I will tell you that as we see remnants of the 60s alive in 2020 today, that one of the biggest differentiators between 1968 and 2020 today is the fact that housing providers themselves, Wells Fargo, Nationwide, other providers are coming forward and supporting the Fair Housing Act at this time, and a rate that is stunning and overwhelming with appreciation the fair housing industry after we started from a space of the legislation couldn't even be passed. So simply to understand the differentiation has existed from its inception, and that fair housing equity lens is a must on top of an economic lens. So to get into the concepts of what that means, so now we understand that we know what needs to happen, but what is it? So to start to apply it to the Housing Opportunity Fund, I want to point out that the city has identified to the Fair Housing Partnership repeatedly that the HOF is a key vehicle for addressing historic and systemic inequity, that the city of Pittsburgh has conveyed in communications repeatedly and often that it expects that the HOF addresses its fair housing concerns by its work. And so in order for that to happen, I am here to talk about understanding what that equity lens is. So I will reiterate this several times, but simply understand that equity is two-pronged. We are both investing in neighborhoods and communities that have not only been disinvested, but have been destroyed by city and private decision-making. As we look back at the Hill District, as we look back at East Liberty and urban planning in the 60s. So it's not simply a matter of disinvestment, it's a matter of destruction by private and public policymaking that has removed Black wealth and Black equity from the city over time. Further, equity is about making traditionally neighborhoods that are traditionally been unavailable to the protected classes, neighborhoods that have been traditionally unavailable because of this policy making to Black Pittsburgh, open, welcoming, and inclusive. Simply the creation of housing in, say, a Squirrel Hill or a Shady Side or a Highland Park, which is a crucial first step, doesn't make it welcoming and accommodating and a place that Black and brown Pittsburgh want to live because of the oppression of the neighborhood and the knowledge of what may happen in a historically walled off section of Pittsburgh. So to look at what we have and to understand it, and again, this is meant as an example to help push us forward all in our shared goal. So I understand and I review the 2019 HOF annual report. And this is the page that I found that included the demographic data. The demographic data included in the report speaks to the race of the households served within the HOF programs. And it also shows per district the number of households served per district within each of the HOF programs. So to break down A, what is needed in additional data, and B, what we can look at as a means of what do we do with the data? The data is the first step. How do we apply that equity lens in order to inform our decision making of the programs themselves? So to walk us through that is that the data provided in the upper right-hand corner of the image of the person identifies race. And race is identified as Black, Asian, American Indian, Alaskan Native, white, multiple races, and undisclosed. Now, looking at that race-based data, I will tell you, I don't want to get stuck on this concept of what it is that we're missing, but based on this data alone, the biggest, foremost question that comes up right now is, where is Brown Pittsburgh? I understand that Brown Pittsburgh is a small demographic proportion, but especially in 2020, Brown Pittsburgh has a very big impact on HOF programming, especially the housing stabilization program, because of the rate and the severity that Brown Pittsburgh is impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic based on service industry jobs. So at a beginning, the data is a step, but the data needs to include more in order for us to then make a better analysis to then help inform the decision making. So to give some of that data in context based on the data that we do know, we do need to reach out and understand what the context is of Pittsburgh in order to understand how we are in the larger both country. In this situation, I am looking at HUD Region. HUD Region 3, given our HUD representative here, given our HUD language in terms of what it means in Pittsburgh to be in the shared HUD region that we live in. So simply recognize that in HUD Region 3, it includes Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and DC. So to compare those other states in DC to Pittsburgh, we're going to look at homeownership. So in homeownership, based on the 2018 census data, nationwide, homeownership has a massive racial disparity between Black and white America. And this is a crucial reason why there is a lack of equity, a lack of household wealth in Black families, because of the lack of access to homeownership. Because homeownership is single-handedly the accumulation and transfer of wealth across generations. And so I say that to look at nationally, 44% of Black families are homeowners compared to 73.7% of white families. That's the national trend. But then when we look at that national trend in context of Region 3, Pittsburgh is the only metro area that goes below that nationwide trend, and not simply below the nationwide trend, below dramatically. Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, and Virginia, Delaware and West Virginia weren't large enough metropolitans to be included in this study, has markedly higher Black homeownership rates and even slightly higher white homeownership rates. So the lack of Black homeownership explicitly in the city of Pittsburgh is not only severe, which then informs that September 2019 study, but it is severe in our housing space specific to other metropolitans throughout our HUD region. The severity of a lack of Black homeownership is arguably, and certainly we need to discuss this more, based on the removal of Black wealth by city decision making, with examples such as the destruction of the Hill District in East Liberty with Penn Circle. And so our obligation, whether or not we were the decision makers, is to do our part to put that wealth back. Because whether or not it was us, we, the institutions we are in right now, is what took it from Black Pittsburgh. So then to continue looking at the concept of homeownership disparity, that the racial disparity is 29.7% across the country as a national trend. And again, in Pittsburgh, it is the highest. The disparity between Black and white Pittsburgh and homeownership is the highest in Region 3 by far. The only other metropolitan that even goes over 30% with the racial disparity in homeownership is Baltimore. And still that 7% less than Pittsburgh's nearly 40% racial disparity between Black and white homeownership in the city. So then we look at what we're doing with the HOF in order to address the overall economic need for homeownership. So for example, using the data provided in the final audit report for 2019, we can see that the down payment and closing cost assistance program is nearly half of the HOF budget at a little over $400,000. And so what happens is the data shows that based on race, out of 65 households served, we have pretty much a one-to-one of Black and white households served within the homeownership program. And so the data is extremely helpful to understand that the one-to-one is a good place to start. It is a positive place to start. But in order to address this severe, massive disparities that the data shows us to exist, we want to be at a place where we can set a goal. We can set an informative goal that says one-to-one isn't good enough. We need 3, or actually we need a 4-to-1 demographic ratio that's going to inform our marketing, that's going to inform our outreach in order to bring Black Pittsburgh into this program, in order to restore the Black wealth that our own systems have taken away. Now, the data, I understand it, is going to always be reported based on district. And I will say that without additional data, so reporting it based on district, all I could do was extrapolate racial data district-wide. And so what's so crucial about reporting by district is that that data includes the racial breakdown of the applicants served in each district. So for example, in District 4, where we have close to a 9% roughly Black alone population, and there is a decent quarter of all households served, it's this white Pittsburgh buying homes in white areas. Similarly, in District 12, it's this Black Pittsburgh buying homes in predominantly Black areas. Not that that's a negative or problematic, but what it does by understanding that data is to add layers that says, now that we're providing home ownership and equity amongst Pittsburgh residents in owning their own homes and land, what can we do with our marketing, with our outreach, with our understanding in order to help integrate, in order to help make District 12 welcoming and open to white Pittsburgh? And what's crucial, District 12 doesn't not simply be open to white Pittsburgh, but District 14 needs to be open to Black Pittsburgh. We need to do both sides of the equation. We can't simply displace Black Pittsburgh. The point is to open up Pittsburgh for all of us in order to truly integrate and be inclusive. So that goes into a couple of facts looking at outside of district-wide information, where in the city are these households served? We need to understand, specifically based on racial segregation, how we are seeing homeownership overlay with the racial segregation that we know exists in the city. Simply as a data set, for those of you who might have seen this before, this has been updated with the 2014-2018 ACS estimates, as it was previously the last set of estimates. But knowing that Pittsburgh is so racially segregated that if we go to Point Breeze and we cross Penn Avenue, depending on what side of Penn Avenue we are on, we have a 30% differential of the racial demographic. Penn Avenue, depending on what side of the street you're standing on in Point Breeze, is either 36% Black or 5.6% Black. That is an embodiment of how severe our racial segregation is, neighborhood to neighborhood and street by street. So to then overlay the fair housing analysis, what we can show is that mapping of plotting the addresses, plotting the locations, not to a point that someone can see the addresses, but that we can understand it from a sense of mapping, the dots and the locations of where in those districts those households bought homes, differentiated by the household race, overlaid with the city's demographic data, gets us the information and data to analyze it, to understand it, to then inform how we're running the program in a way that doesn't only address economic need, but it addresses an equity need, because we know that the equity lens is critical for Pittsburgh to be a modern city that is addressing the history of segregation and inequity that we come from. And so simply to touch on, as another quick example, I know I'm running short on time. Again, I can talk about this at length with anyone who's interested to do so, but the Housing Stabilization Program, simply to understand it based on the 2019 audit report. So the audit report shows that out of 151 households served, 135 of those households were Black, which is fantastic, which is absolutely a need in order to prevent housing displacement and the impact that comes with homelessness or housing instability. But to understand that data, we look at the fact that in 2019, the administration of that program was solely done by the Urban League of Greater Pittsburgh. And so 2020 will inherently be drastically different in understanding the households and demographics served, which is critical and important. And also we're going to have as 11 or 12 administrators of the program now. And so understanding how to inform each administrator of their reach and the success with who we are reaching in Pittsburgh is to understand and be able to make that equity lens we've been discussing each time in order to inform whether or not we are getting those HSP funds, especially in the wake of COVID-19, to the most vulnerable, which are not only are we all suffering economically, but the protected classes and the historically disenfranchised suffer more. And so understanding the impact of that with the new structure of the program will be critical in doing an assessment in the next year. I will also say, simply as a side note, with the culture of Pittsburgh, is that I have heard callers when they're referred to the Urban League for the HSP program in the past, pre-pandemic, have been concerned or confused as far as whether white Pittsburgh or non-Black Pittsburgh can access the Urban League. And so certainly in 2020, we expect, or we would like to see the data that shows the impact of the variety of administrators as it relates to who in Pittsburgh is accessing those HSP funds. Oops. So simply to reiterate it, as I can't reiterate it enough, is the understanding that understanding the HOS programs with an equity lens to both invest in majority Black neighborhoods as well as to make neighborhoods available that historically have been unavailable to Black Pittsburgh is crucial. It is truly the application of a fair housing lens to the HOF programs and to the HOF development decisions on the siting and development of housing based on bedroom size, accessibility, and so on. Simply as a bullet list to understand, to begin a larger fair housing conversation on top of racial inequity, we can look at the fact of the need for accessible housing, given that our housing stock is so incredibly old that physical and the physicality of it is largely inaccessible citywide. The limitations of housing for families with children based on unit sizes available and based on ongoing discrimination that FHP continues to address. Additionally, given both the protected class of sex and the city's protections for survivors of domestic violence, is to understand the impact of housing and how it relates to survivors of domestic violence and the need to make sure that survivors of domestic violence are being served by the housing market for safe housing for themselves and their family. Which brings us to questions, and I apologize if I went out of time. I'm trying to monitor the virtual space as much as possible. And then Jay, if you have any other words and additional, I know I spoke quickly.
No worries. So first of all, before we go to questions, wonderful presentation from HUD's aspect. Let me say that now. It's really fun to say that. I will just point out that initially, one of the points that you made, I think we have worked with the HOF and, over the year, previous years to start the process of really accurately collecting data. You brought up a good point about making sure we have enough data. You moved on to the point, though, of the analysis and then using that analysis to help formulate what programs really affect fair housing. And I think that's the point where we're at right now, and where to really be effective, we need to see a space in which we're not just collecting data, but we're using that with an analysis to inform our decisions on the programs that we're running. I think that's the space looking for. But wonderful presentation, and I will turn to questions.
Thank you, Megan and Jay, so much for this presentation. It's very timely, based on some nationwide news, that has happened the last week regarding fair housing and affordable housing. Additionally, thank you also for shining the light on the racial disparity amongst home ownership in the city. And Anne from the CMU Create Lab also highlighted this a month ago. And some of you probably saw the nationwide news. NBC News ran an article earlier this week that listed Pittsburgh as the 5th worst city for the racial disparity in homeownership. And that is something, you know, that we all really want to strive to fix. And I can say that from the URA side, in the last few months, we've already started to talk about this topic a lot and about how to provide outreach regarding homeownership in African American, Black, and Brown communities. So, and I welcome future meetings where we can talk about that in more detail. I open it up to additional questions from the advisory board.
This is Adrienne Wanaha from Omicello. It's not a question as much as a charge to the HOF as we start to plan for the next allocation round. I think it's critical for us to put these lenses front and center. We've had very tight timelines each year for the allocations, which I think has pushed us to decision making that may not have been as targeted or guided as it could be. So to take the opportunity as we move into this next round to do more education related to these disparities, related to our conversations about geographies, to really think through in a pointed way how we're going to go about allocating funds for the next year. And I think since Megan has been so forward in her approach, she is at each one of our meetings and she's been offering her support, something that may be really timely and appropriate for us to do right now is to try to, before the allocation meeting, have a session to really talk about strategies to further fair housing. That 4-to-1 ratio that was spoken about really resonated with me. So thinking about how we could take some of those lenses, thought patterns, and apply them early in our thinking and set our priorities so that when we're looking at the allocation plan, we have that mindset of what we want to accomplish, not only from a housing units perspective or a people served perspective, but how we're really changing the landscape of housing and economic equity in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, at the end of the meeting, we're actually going to talk about our schedule for the 2021 allocation plan. So we should pencil that into this schedule to be able to allocate ourselves enough time to do that.
Wonderful. And thank you, Megan. That was a really powerful presentation. I think it was timely. And I think it would be great if, again, as we go forward, if we think about in every meeting, these meetings are so congested, but is there a way in every meeting that we can really set aside time to, again, think about these larger lenses and impact so that we really have the bigger picture in mind each time we're having a conversation. So if that's something that we could think about, or think about subcommittees, if we really feel that this meeting is much more of an administrative meeting, but we could have subcommittees to really dig into some of these issues. We could have outside sessions to enhance the learning of the board members. I think we could get to a much deeper and richer place in our thinking and our strategies going forward.
I have a question as well. First of all, thank you, Megan, Jay, for that amazing presentation. It was very powerful and necessary. So you talked about the data, and you talked about a lot of data, assessing it, but then really using it to make concrete, deliberate decisions. So my question is really, will you all have an ongoing engagement as we move to the next phase for actually incorporating this into, decisions going forward? Of course we have our thoughts, but I think having you all actually give some input in those decision-making, policies and things going forward will be critical. So.
I think it's fair to say, as you know, we have asked for and have been willing to have that role for some time. So I will speak on behalf of the Fair Housing Partnership, even though I'm no longer at the Fair Housing Partnership, and say I'm comfortable saying that both HUD and the Fair Housing Partnership are willing to commit to assisting in any way to be part of that process to ensure that we have a far more equitable Pittsburgh. Whether that means going to and participating in subcommittee meetings, whether that means providing expertise and knowledge to the board as a whole, wherever I think we can be of assistance. This is why we have been continually coming here, quite frankly, because we know the importance of this, and we know that many of you know the importance of this too. So we are more than willing to provide that on an ongoing level. We just need to know how that's going to work out, how we participate that way.
One thing that I would like to add, again, this was a wonderful presentation. I feel educated and enlightened, and I thank you for taking the time to prepare it and continuing to hold this advisory board accountable to affirmatively advancing fair housing. And so, but one comment that I did want to make about the slide related to where people are buying homes and in what districts. One thing that I do want to note from a qualitative perspective, being somebody who's from the Hill District, grew up in the Hill District, and when I had an opportunity to buy, I was adamant that I was going to buy in the Hill District because of the cultural ties and what that neighborhood means to me. Now, as a Black person, I could have, moved to any part of the city, that I wanted to, but I chose to stay in the neighborhood that I grew up in because that was important to me. So I want to make sure that when we're looking at that quantitative measure, that we're also understanding from a qualitative perspective, people want to buy in the neighborhood they're already in because their kids are there, their networks are there. And so I do think that the work of this advisory board is to help people buy homes in the neighborhoods they're in. We know that Pittsburgh is very segregated, so that may mean, a Black person buying a home in a Black neighborhood. But I don't think that we need to see that as a systemic failure. I think we can also look at that as a win because we are helping people as neighborhoods change and neighborhoods shift actually have an ownership stake. And so I think if you unpack some of that data around where the down payment assistance closing costs are being applied to, you would see that that family is very much in the ownership seat around where they want to live in the city of Pittsburgh. So I just wanted to add that as a note. And again, thank you for the very thoughtful, dynamic presentation today.
And I think to that point, as was brought up by Megan, one of the things about the role that fair housing plays is we look at it in two lenses. One is about housing choice, and so that people are made aware of the opportunities, and the other is about investment in otherwise historically disinvested communities. So we see both things. It's not an either or. It is we invest in our historically Black underinvested communities, and we provide people with opportunity to look at areas that they've been traditionally boxed out of. The thing for us, when we talk about the data and an analysis, is really about, to your point, drilling down. Do we have a situation in which a majority of Black homeownership has stayed within a community and are building that community up, which is ideal. Ultimately what we'd like to see is for a community to transition, get resources into that community, allow for the existing membership of that community to stay as it excels, right, and to benefit as investment comes into that community. Right? We're not interested in seeing historically Black communities get a ton of investment and then get the Black community wiped out of there. That's not helpful to our purpose. Gentrification in that term is the nasty space versus the kind of investment and allowing for Black community members to become homeowners. The question, though, in terms of addressing the data is looking at those spaces and saying, okay, so what are, if you see a line that says the white area has stayed overwhelmingly white and the Black area stayed overwhelmingly Black, right? So what are we missing in this, right? Is it because there is a benefit to integrated neighborhoods and integrated home ownership, right? And there's a benefit for everyone. So as Megan said, in those traditionally Black neighborhoods, we want to see investment into infrastructure, and we want to see some white people moving into those neighborhoods because there's value in those white folks being around the Black community, just like there's value for Black folks being around the predominantly white communities. So that's the end game of it. It does require a drill down on the data so that we can better inform how we use our policies and programs.
So as this conversation is moving into, broader topics that are sometimes outside of the Housing Opportunity Fund, I mean, this was an important presentation, and I'm thankful for that Megan did. It helped to contextualize, the disparities, and here's some tangible actions. Very often we see these disparity studies, and we just become disparate. It leads to despair because we don't know what to do about it. And so there are some tangible things that we can do. And so now we're getting the conversations about neighborhoods of choice. There's some other good work where Megan Stanley is drilling out, looking at the data on what mortgages are, mortgage applications in Black neighborhoods, and how qualified Black applicants are being denied mortgages at a much higher rate, where white applicants are getting loans in Black neighborhoods. And she's putting that data together. And I think we need to have all of these housing conversations at some point, looking at the big picture and connecting them to the problems that we're trying to solve, and not just the short, the immediate work that the Housing Opportunity Fund's doing, but the bigger picture of housing opportunities across the region in neighborhoods where people want to be, and what that looks like. And so, I mean, I don't have a specific question. This is just a comment. This is an important piece to the conversation. There are other pieces that we need to bring together that focus on these problems that we're trying to solve.
There's a point to, there's a comment that I'll make to that comment in the space that both HUD and the Fair Housing Partnership look at the space of fair lending as part of fair housing. It is a broader, larger space that we have to work in. And the reality is, as you saw from some of those statistics, especially now that I've moved over to HUD, it is very difficult, to have a conversation about Pittsburgh without talking about the fact that we sit as, the greatest disparities in the Region 3, right, which is our HUD region. So I'm talking to my Maryland people and talking to my Philly people, right, and they're pointing out, saying, listen, you've got the greater issue here. And so we need to look at all of those things in order to address these disparities. It's not a single space, for sure. Right. We're in all of those spaces, and so we certainly welcome anyone who would like to have that conversation with us. We certainly talk with Megan regularly.
And Region 3 aside, I mean, nationally, we suck.
No, I'm trying to be kind about it.
No, it's bad. I've seen the national numbers.
My new role prohibits me from being as candid. But yes, we do. I mean, listen, I come out of Detroit, which has its own very clear racial segregation. And I thought that was the pinnacle of racial segregation, because you could, on a map, it's so visual because we go by Mile Road, and white flight followed Mile Roads, right? Mm. So I thought no matter where I move, I will never see segregation like that, right? And then I got here, and I saw what it looks like when you obliterate a Black community, spread it out, and then start your segregation. Right? You can't even see it. So yes, we suck. This is a fair assessment.
I make a comment. I just wanted to thank our speakers again, and I think it was echoing what everyone said. Some next steps, if we could talk about, I know we've talked about, updating our criteria, but we've also been anxious to get more funds out the door. But, adding this as explicit, some affirmatively furthering fair housing as explicit criteria in selecting our projects, identifying an affirmatively furthering fair housing marketing plan for our program, specifically the homeowner program, but, look at the other ones as well. And then just one last request. I know the city put in out a statement regarding, the recent rule change at HUD around furthering fair housing. Is that something that the URA would be willing to do as well?
Yeah, I need to talk with our, with others at the URA, but I do expect the URA, to come out with a statement.
Just a quick question, and I know we're starting to get tight on time. But one of the things that's been, I think, brought up multiple times is how we're eliciting information from folks in communities about what they want, what they need, how we transform our community. And we've done a lot of large, more town hall style conversations. And I'm curious if Megan and Jay have any more micro level data where there's been this deeper dive taken with individuals specifically, more of a focus group or pointed interviewings, key informants, that helps us set the narrative for that deeper dive. Because if we're just looking at that macro level data, I think we're missing a lot of the great nuances that were brought up by folks like Diamante. You know, how do we really not lose the forest for the trees? So if there is any more of that more micro level data, I would love personally to have access to that. And I think if you do have repositories of this information, I feel confident that Jessica and the URA would be willing to and happy to distribute to us materials that we could dive into individually and then bring that knowledge base back to the conversation.
We can certainly keep talking about that, and certainly you understand that the collection of data itself is one of the biggest hurdles. And so we're certainly willing to coordinate and collaborate with neighborhood town halls with targeting known fair housing concerns in neighborhoods and districts, or the focus of the audience there. Simply the deliberative thought process and planning and coordinating amongst each other to do so. I will say from FHP's perspective, we're in the process of implementing a database that allows for the quick drawdown of specific data as a means of targeting presentation, to your point. And that's an ongoing process we're going through the next few months. And so there isn't anything for immediate distribution, but certainly we can just continue discussing, you know, what's being scheduled, where we can be effective, and what information we can provide that's most meaningful and that speaks to that specific audience. We'd be happy to do so. It simply requires that pre-planning and scheduling out.
Thank you.
Also, are you all able to share this presentation with the board?
Megan, I'll, you know, if you want to give it to me, I can email it to the advisory board. It's really up to you.
I'm not sure if she heard you, but she certainly can share the
Okay, great, great. Okay, are there any other questions? You know, once again, just thank you both for being here, and we will continue, you know, to keep in touch and to continue the working relationship that we have. Okay, moving on to the voting part of the agenda, and since we took roll, I see Derek Tillman and Sonia Tillman have both joined, so we do now have a quorum. I have, however, been notified by a couple people that they might have to leave early. So I do ask staff, URA staff, to keep their presentations here very short for the next few voting items. We will start with E, the Homeowner Assistance Program. This is to increase contracts again, similarly to what we did last month. Before Jeremy gives a very quick overview, does any advisory board member need to exempt out of voting for the HAP, the Homeowner Assistance Program category?
I'm sorry, what year was the funds?
For 2020, I don't think we have any conflicts, Jessica.
Does
Okay.
Action Housing have a conflict?
No.
Well, yes, I mean, not today, but they are participating in 2020, are they not?
They are.
Yes, then,
Okay.
Lena.
I'll recuse myself. Potential future application.
Is that Joanna?
Yes.
Okay, so Joanna and Lena both exempt out of this category. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Jessica, you might want to do the minutes just to not forget.
Oh, I'm sorry. Evan just reminded me we forgot to review and accept the minutes. Did everybody get a chance to review the minutes?
Move to approve. This is Mark.
Okay, Mark moved to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Was that knowledge?
Derek.
Derek. Okay, Mark, Derek, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody
Aye.
abstain?
Aye. No, not abstaining.
No
Leo abstains.
No? Okay. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so are we back on homeownership assistance program? Okay,
Yes.
go ahead, Jeremy.
So we're here today to ask the advisory board for approval to enter into contract amendments for 3 of our homeowner assistance program administrators. All of these awards are coming out of the 2020 fund. Hilltop Alliance, Rebuilding Together Pittsburgh, and Low Country Building Solutions are all getting their 3rd increase for this program. Reason that we are coming to you for these increases is that they're all at capacity and ready to take on more. So we are moving at a very good pace in this program. At any given time, we have between 80 and 100 active projects. So this request is to increase each of their contract amendments.
Would anyone like to make a motion? Or are there questions?
This is
Move.
Sonia. I move to approve.
Sonia made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. This is Mark.
Mark. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Jamil?
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next is the Woodland Avenue. We kind of broke it out into pieces, but basically there are 3 different for-sale development program requests. The first one is Bedford Avenue, and it is a pre-development request, followed by the Hazelwood Housing Initiative, and then Woodland Avenue. So Sarah Shore is a relatively new. You are a staff member. Can you please give us a brief overview of Bedford Avenue?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. The Hill CDC is requesting $52,000 for sale development program pre-development loan in order to finance activities related to 6 affordable for sale single-family homes on the 2700 block of Bedford Avenue. The block consists of 15 contiguous townhomes, as you can see on the map here. And these homes are built in 1930, and though they've survived demolition to this point, they're not doing very well right now. In response, the Hill CDC plans to renovate 6 of these homes. Of the remaining 9 homes on the block, 5 are currently occupied and are being affected by these empty and dilapidated structures the Hill CDC hopes to renovate. So as I mentioned, they're asking for $52,000 in pre-development loans to use for design development, appraisals, maintenance, legal costs, financing fees, a few other things. Eventually, the project is going to involve a complete interior and exterior renovation of the 6 structures. This project, as of right now, as it's in the pre-development state, doesn't have a general contractor, but their architect will be Winston Design. In addition to this URA funding, they're going to use their own equity as well as a PNC line of credit to finance the required 50% match of this FSDP pre-development loan. The loan is going to have 0% interest and will be paid at time of closing and built into the construction financing to be used as a source of construction expenses. Ultimately, these 2-bedroom units are going to be offered to households at or below 50% AMI, which would be great for the area. And in 2017, the Hills Stabilization Committee examined at-risk properties and identified this block as one section that they really wanted to work on in the neighborhood. So URA has been working closely with the Hill CDC, specifically Nancy Noska, to maintain this partnership and to redevelop these townhomes. And so Nancy's here today, and I'll introduce her and see if there's anything short that she wants to add before we take any questions.
Just really excited to get them done. Recently, we got condemnation notices on them. We've also applied for a blight remediation grant, hoping to get these as soon as possible under construction. So, and they meet all the targets that we all just discussed or heard over the last year. So I'm excited about it.
and also I should say this one is similar to one you saw last month with the PHDC, where it is for pre-development. So it will have a 10-year affordability.
Jessica, just to clarify, are these the 2020 funds?
No, we're still in 2018 funds.
Okay, I was recusing from this program for 2020, so I'm not recusing. Just...
Okay, does anybody, and that reminds me, this is a different program than the one we just recused
Yeah,
from.
this is Sonia. I'm recusing myself.
Okay, Sonia, anybody else need to recuse from 2018 for sale development program funding?
Derek.
Derek.
Yeah, I have no idea because,
Yeah.
which are all of these projects coming out of 2018?
Yes, they are. So I would say yes, Mark.
All right.
Okay, so Mark, Sonia, Derek. Anybody else? Okay.
One other thing I'd like to say is this is one of the few blocks that the 15 contiguous remains standing. And when you look at the devastation over time, it's really worth historically saving this, as an impact for the block. It would be really hard to lose any of these at this point.
And if I might just add, this is David Serbin working with Nancy on this. This is a while that we've been trying to do this. We try to move people often from renting to ownership. A lot of people are paying rents where they could afford to pay for their own mortgage for their own house, and we have programs for that. So we have a long list of people that are interested in moving into these houses.
That's great.
So do you have a budget for the development phase as well, or you're just?
Yes, we do. We have some work to do to finalize our drawings, though. We're just getting these funds here to allow our architect to work on it. And then we'll be able to put those out for a full bid. We've gotten estimates of them to this point.
Because I think your income targets are wonderful, but when you start to look at the total development cost, you're gonna need a lot of gap money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll be applying for some of that gap funds, but not outside of the guidelines.
If there's no more questions, can someone make a motion?
Motion to approve for sale development program for Bedford Avenue.
In the amount of $52,000. Is there a
second that?
Jamil. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, next is another for sale development program with the Hazelwood Initiative, Hazelwood Affordable Homeownership Program, Phase 3B. Evan.
Sure. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Evan Miller with the Housing and Lending Unit at the URA. And today I'm seeking approval for a $150,000 for sale development program construction loan in support of the Hazelwood Affordable Homeownership Program, Phase 3B, with the Hazelwood Initiative. So HAHOP there is an established program that's been run by Hazelwood for a few years, where they aim to provide deeply affordable for sale housing opportunities to longtime renters in the neighborhood, furthering the neighborhood's overall strategy of development without displacement. And for phase 3 of this program, they were awarded 2019 Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program funds as grant money in the project. And what they ended up doing was creating 6 units overall in phase 3. And they created 2 phases, phase 3A and phase 3B. They were able to start phase 3A a number of months ago with that grant money from the Federal Home Loan Bank. But now they need to do their fundraising for the construction financing of phase 3B, which are the last 3 units. So it'd be $150,000, $50,000 per unit, and it would be a construction loan, which is something we haven't yet done out of the for sale development program. meaning that money upon sale of the units to the end buyers is going to come back to the Housing Opportunity Fund for us to invest again in similar types of projects. So we're really excited about that. Overall, this phase 3B is going to be financed with $414,000 of credit from First Commonwealth Bank. About $324,000 is reimbursable as part of their grant. And then the other $90,000, similar to the HOF loan, is going to be paid out at closing. And we're looking at sales prices on these units around $90,000, which is very, compared to the rest of the city, much lower than we typically see, even in deals that are involving for sale development dollars. But this phase yesterday with the URA Real Estate Loan Review Committee was actually approved for deferred second mortgage financing. So we believe that we're going to get really deep affordability in this project with buyers making possibly as low as around like $25,000 being able to afford several of the units that are in this project. So all in all, we're really excited about it and the ability to get that deep level of affordability, get paid back, and help this project move forward. So an affordability restriction for all 6 units, not just the 3 that are involved with this loan, but all 6 units that are in phase 3 are going to be subject to an affordability deed restriction for 10 years, requiring that the resale of the property must be affordable to a buyer at or below 80% AMI and at a sales price that's affordable to that income level. And that's because it's a loan. It doesn't trigger that permanent affordability. Otherwise, this project is on track with its MWB and diversity goals with the URA, and we'll have a completed plan before we actually go to construction closing for phase 3B. And other than that, I believe I had invited Dave Bruton. I'm not sure he's joined, but I'm willing to take any questions, and Sonia is also here if she needs to speak to it, I suppose. But I'll turn it over to the board now.
But for the minutes, I will just reemphasize that Sonia Tillman abstained, and she is Executive Director at Hazelwood Initiative. Are there any questions? If there's no questions, can we move forward towards a vote?
I make a motion to approve.
Jerome Jackson, thank you.
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. This is Knowledge.
Knowledge. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody abstain? Or we already did abstains, I guess. Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and the next is also for sale. So I do wanna put kind of a couple of statements here. You know, the for sale one was the program that we had the most funding available. So I am happy that the community development corporations have recently started to submit a lot of applications for this program. And then additionally on Woodland Avenue, and Brett will give us a quick overview, but the way we wrote it, it's actually H, I, and J on the agenda because of the way it's tiered, because of the way it's going to go into the program as loans and grants. However, if you add it up and divide by 5 units, it's within $70,000 a unit for the project. So I'm passing it over to Brett.
All right, thanks, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. This is Brett. Today I'm seeking approval for a combination of an FSDP loan and grants for phases 3A and 3B of the Woodland Avenue Revitalization Project. Collectively, this is the 3rd and final phase of the project. Brightwood Civic Group is the borrower and developer, and Northside Leadership Conference is the development consultant. Phase 3A involves the rehabilitation and sale of 4 units along Woodland Ave. Phase 3B is for 2 units. The reason that this project's divided into 2 separate phases is strictly due to the fact that some units are eligible for neighborhood stabilization program funds. The 4 and 3A are receiving those through PHCF loan. The other 2 are not eligible, so they do not meet that criteria. But all 6 units will be rehabbed and sold to buyers at or below 80% AMI, and all 6 will also receive deferred second mortgages through the HRPD program. So the funding for your review in Phase 3A includes a $128,000 HOF FSDP loan, as well as a $133,611 HOF FSDP grant. The total HOF commitment between the loan and the grant on 3A is about $261,000. So it is, like Jessica said, within that $70,000 maximum per unit across those 4 units. The loan itself would have a 0% interest rate, 24-month term, and would occupy a second lien position behind the primary West Banco construction loan. That loan is about $509,440. And then for Phase 3B, the funding for your review includes a $140,000 HOF FSDP grant. Each of the 2 units would receive the maximum $70,000 per unit. And then because all 6 units receive either a combination of the HOF FSDP grant or loan, there'll be a 99-year affordability restriction placed on all 6 units. And at this time, I'll just introduce Darnell Jackson and Mark Fatla with the Northside Leadership Conference to say a few words before we take any questions. Thank you.
Yes, this is Darnell here. I just wanted to thank you guys. You know, I mean, this presentation, sitting in on the whole thing, has been great for me. Just want to thank you guys for your commitment to affordable housing in the city of Pittsburgh. I mean, we know that what has been going on here, the rapid rise and increase in the prices of properties here, and having a group like you guys here to help with that problem of keeping affordable houses in the city it's just wonderful to see and wonderful to be a part of the process with you guys. This project is, I wouldn't say that we are finished with the neighborhood here, but I would say that in the Marshall-Shadeland area, we will now in future projects begin to look at other streets. This is the third phase on Woodland Avenue. I don't know how many of you guys remember some of the things that were occurring in Woodland Avenue on Woodland 5 10 years ago. Lots of shootings, lots of blight, lots of landlords who were not taking care of their properties. Well, the great thing that has happened is that Brightwood was very committed to changing the dynamics of this major artery in their neighborhood, and thus has actually been able to eliminate a lot of the crime that is occurring in that area. I mean, I haven't heard about any shootings or anything bad on Woodland Avenue in a long time. Some of that stuff down to other parts of the neighborhood, but we have kind of secured this major artery. These 6 houses will be sold 80% AM. We've been very successful in getting buyers in. I mean, there are a lot of people who actually want to move into this neighborhood, and actually, I mean, we have one property that has been completed now from phase 2. We actually just sold maybe 2 weeks ago another property from phase 2, and we are phase 3. And then after that point, we will be probably coming back and actually some of the other streets there. But I want to thank the URA. I want to thank all of our partners, the community development, the Northside Community Development Fund. I want to thank all of you guys for your commitment to this neighborhood. It is a great neighborhood. It is a middle neighborhood that leads to the Brighton Heights area, and connects the farther reaches of the north side to the central north side. So it is vital that we had gotten some of the crime and some of the blight that was occurring in this neighborhood under control. I can say that we are well on that path. And again, thank you all for all of your support in this project.
Mark,
I just wanted to say one very simple thing. The house we just sold 2 weeks ago, single father with 2 daughters. He works in the city. I think he's a bus driver. But he was so excited about that house for months. He would stop during construction. He would go through it. He brought his daughters to sit on the porch. I mean, the guy would drop in my office on a weekly basis and ask me how soon he could put money down and sign an agreement. Our first 3 buyers in the Woodland series were single women. And we've really seen a whole different opportunity for that community that really got hollowed out on home ownership when Horace Mann School closed. A lot of families that lived there fled when the school closed 15 years ago or better. And so this has been a way for them to rebuild their home ownership base, attract new folks. It's been successful. So I think that's a tribute to the vision of the community leadership in Brightwood, Jamie Younger, Angel Gover, and the folks at the neighborhood level who are doing this. Remember, we're just the technicians. They're the guys who are driving the energy and the strategy. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all your work in the neighborhood. Are there any other questions? If not, can I hear a motion from someone?
I did have a question.
Yes.
I'm glad to see this project come before us, and I'm glad to see on the north side a consideration for long-term affordability. I think that's wonderful. My one question is about stewardship. So for 99 years, it's a long time. And I wanted to know if they had considered talking to City of Bridges Community Land Trust to potentially help steward these properties. 99 years, like I said, it's a long time. And for a community group, you know, a lot can happen. So I just wanted to see if there was any consideration to that. And if not, that be something that's explored.
We can certainly make that referral back to Brightwood. I don't know all of the conversations they've had, so we can certainly pass that back and make that connection for them.
Okay, great. And I'd be glad to talk to them as well about our experience working with them.
Are there any other questions? If not, when somebody makes a motion, if what you could basically say is piecing H, I, and J together, so it would be kind of a 3-tiered motion if you could just read the amounts of funding for each of the 3 tiers.
I'll make a motion to approve the 3 tiers of support for Woodland Avenue Phase 3A and 3B.
Update the board members, chief of staff.
3 tiers are $128,000 for a for-sale development program loan for Phase 3A, $133,611 for a for-sale development program grant for Phase 3A, and then $140,000 for-sale development program grant for Phase 3B. Joanna made the motion. Is there a second?
I will second.
Jerome Jackson, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? I hear no opposition, so motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, so I think that's all for voting. So if people were hanging on to be counted in the quorum, thank you so much. Moving on to staff updates. So this first one is the Community Ambassador Program. At the last month's meeting, we brought a contract in front of you for Amicello. Today, there's not an action needed because the URA contract is with Amicello, but Jeremy and Amasella would like to update you regarding the program and the RFP that Amasella issued.
Sure, thanks, Jessica. Omacell had the RFP open for about 2 weeks and then met with advisory board member representatives, URA representatives, and other stakeholders in the community around housing to discuss the applications that they received. After those meetings, Omacell selected 4 agencies to become community ambassador organizations. So that's Wellness Collective, 5U Citizens Council, Hazelwood Initiative. Homewood Children's Village is also on there, and there is talks about possibly also having Homewood Children's Village maybe possibly work with Operation Better Black, but those conversations I think are still happening. But of the awards that are finalized, we will have a total of at least 9 ambassadors throughout these organizations. And again, this will be to help residents apply to the Housing Stabilization Program, but also other rental and mortgage assistance programs available within the county as well. So this is just an update.
And due to the congested timeline, we felt that there were opportunities for folks to apply, but there was also the difficulty of during COVID and isolation and some of the restrictions that folks are facing, including serving a lot more folks during this time, that the application period was short. And that we wanted to keep our conversations open as we start with our 9 ambassadors to be constantly benchmarking and taking our lessons learned and bringing them back to the community for conversations on how we move forward and potential expansion as we launch the program.
So I just want to be clear on this. Operation Better Block in Homewood Children's Village, we have not had any conversations about this program and are not in any conversations about the community ambassador program. So just to be clear, that may happen in the future, but that is not happening at this point. So just
I was actually just sending you an email, Jerome. That was just a misstatement, and I apologize.
And you know, that does remind me that a couple of advisory board members are part of these groups. So once again, there's not an action being taken, but I did want to reemphasize that Joanna Deming is part of FindView and Sonia Tillman is part of Hazelwood Initiative. Any other questions or comments related to this? Okay, moving on, and I also want to acknowledge for the record, I am scrolling through Zoom here and I see that a few members have joined us. Teresa Kale Smith, Kelly Ware Seaburn, and I think Jerome, I don't think you were here actually when we called roll as well. So we have 3 more members. So thank you for joining. Next, I want to give you an update on the chair position and the creation of the bylaws, because, you know, as I reported last month, we had a committee meeting and I was encouraged to move as quickly as possible on this. At the same time, we identified the gap of not actually having bylaws. So not only did we not have a description for a chair, but we don't actually know what the committee is technically supposed to be doing. And I re-looked at the legislation, and the legislation basically talks about the committee approving the allocation plan each year as its largest function. It talks about holding quarterly meetings. We choose to hold monthly for public engagement. But according to the legislation, we need to hold quarterly, and that the advisory board needs to be active in the allocation, the identification and allocation. You know, we have historically taken it a step farther by bringing the individual commitment or request, loan requests for the line items in front of you. But what we would like a consultant to do is to study nationwide best practices and tell us, you know, what are other cities doing with their trust funds? how do they operate them, how is public engagement involved, and what is the role of the advisory board. And then to draft a chair description. These are probably out of order. Also for the consultant to interview a few of you to be able to get your ideas and then to create the bylaws. So I did reach out to HRNA advisors who helped us. Those of you that have been here since the beginning know that they helped us set up the fund. And they have given me a proposal to enter into a 4-week engagement to do this. So the plan is for the URA to hire them. We will hopefully get them under contract late next week, and then be able to enter into that 4-week period with the end result being draft bylaws and also a draft chair description. Are there any questions?
Had a quick question about the interviewing with some advisory board members, and as to whether or not there was an opportunity to do some sort of questionnaire so that they could get everyone's input and then maybe have more in-depth conversations with a more select group. Because I'm not sure how we would identify.
Yeah,
those
I
people.
have no idea either. But yeah, I will put that recommendation onto them if they could do a quick survey for everybody. You know, they had just mentioned they didn't, you know, think they could do 17. But
Right, that would be a little unreasonable, but I think, you know, everybody might have some input, would have some input because we represent our different sectors to make sure everybody's input's in there in some form or fashion.
Yeah, I will pass that idea on to them.
Thanks.
And also this will sort of tie to some of what we're going to talk about here in a second when we talk about the 2021 annual allocation plan process. I do think over the next couple months, I'm going to be asking advisory board members, you know, to volunteer their time for several different things. So I just want to give everybody heads up about that. And so you can kind of choose if there's something you're more interested in, you know, like if you really want to be one of the folks that HRNA interviews, please send me an email, let me know, so that, you know, I can start to figure out what your interests are, because I am going to be asking for a lot of committees and a lot of things over the next couple of months as we move towards the next allocation plan. Okay, next. This is just an update. Everybody knows this, I think. The 2019 annual report is published. Megan referenced it. It's on our website. You can find it at ura.org. And thank you to the staff. Thank you to Bettina and Jeremy and everybody that worked on this. And yeah, please, if you haven't looked at it already, please do so. And thanks to the consultant that helped us as well, eProperties. Okay.
It's eHoldings, Jessica.
eHoldings. Thank you. Sorry, wrong firm. Okay, next. And the audit, I just wanted to tell you, you know, every June 30th, not only is the annual report due, the audit is due. We have the audit. If anyone would like to see it, please send me an email and I will get you a copy. Okay, next. Okay, so we are entering into 2021 annual allocation time. So as we all know, now is the time that you know, the city looks at their budgeting for 2021. The HOF is legislated in the legislation to come out of the city's operating budget in the amount of $10 million. But according to the legislation, we have to do a public process. And then we need to be in a position to get to in front of you all for final vote, the URA for final vote, and then also city council before the end of the year. And please recognize that city council is a 3-week process as well once we even introduce the legislation. So we are realizing that we're kind of starting to hit, the time that we got to start moving through this timeline pretty quickly. Here's a proposal of what staff is proposing to do to be able to make it through council before the end of the calendar year. So in August, we have a slate, as you'll remember, a slate of, Bettina, how many firms? About 10?
Yes.
Yeah, about 10 firms that have responded to an RFP to help us do community outreach. We have a slate of about 10 firms. So we plan to do a mini RFP this month to them to help with the community outreach. Now, in this time of COVID and everything is being done on Zoom, a thought that we want to talk to you about is possibly just structuring it as a very small RFP and offering up to maybe 3 or 4, like depending on how many respondents we get, 3 or 4 groups to enter into very small contracts, roughly $1,000 a piece, to host at least one large Zoom meeting through their networks and to disperse information via their networks. At the same time, we will also be working on a survey, which we will ask for volunteers from the advisory board to help us craft those survey questions, but then that our community outreach consultants can help get the survey out. Last year, we did get, Bettina, how many responses did we get last year? About 300?
Yeah.
We got roughly 300 responses to the survey. We really want to get more than that this year, and we feel like by hiring a few consultants that we could help, spread that to a larger network of folks. So if that happens and they're under contract in September, and on the slide here, the survey opens in September and the public meetings are held, then in October, the advisory board can actually draft the plan. At the same time, given the conversation today about fair housing, the advisory board, we might need to start convening meetings at the end of September to discuss, things that we really want to prioritize as we look at this plan. But based on the survey results, start to create the plan in October, which would mean we would need final vote in November from you all. And I know in the past, we have liked to do a preliminary vote and then a final vote. If we allow adequate time for public engagement, I don't know if we'll be able to do that. I mean, we might be able to potentially hold a special advisory board meeting or something like that, 2 weeks apart. But the goal is really to get a final vote from the advisory board in November, followed by a URA governing board vote the second Thursday of November, so that it could be introduced to council the third week of November. And of course, Thanksgiving is in there. So then that'll put us basically 3 weeks into December before getting final vote, hopefully right before the holidays. Are there any questions or thoughts or comments related to all that? I know that was a lot of information.
Jessica, I think that this is, for me, and I think others, an ongoing concern. If we just use the HOF meetings for these conversations, we have basically no time to really dive into any of these topics or really engage in the data. So if we can start to think about either subcommittee meetings or special target focus meetings, so that we can really, each year we're saying we want to take a deeper dive and we want to have strategies, but each year we get to this point where we suddenly have to do this plan and we're rushing forward. And part of that's really because we have a 2-hour administrative meeting every month. And this is a lot more than 2 hours of a meeting every month. So I personally have concerns about the ways that we're engaging the community. I'll speak for Mark Masterson. It's something that he's brought up several times as well. Is there a way here in August, at the bare minimum, could we convene a separate and distinct group of all members that want to participate to talk about how we're going to do that outreach and engagement, to talk about what data we need, to talk about what data we have, to really, I just feel like I'm not doing any of this justice in a 2-hour a month meeting. And I would like to slow down, take a breath, and be able to do better, cleaner, more well-informed work. because I think that this fund deserves it. I think our community deserves it. So if we could talk about that a little bit, I would really appreciate it.
And Adrian, to your point as well, that text that's highlighted in yellow, we will be hosting a meeting for advisory board members who would like to help create the survey, and we can definitely use that meeting as well to discuss and take a deeper dive into the data, so that we can be targeting the questions and ensuring that we are collecting the data that we would like before the survey goes out. So we will be sending.
Could we also discuss format of how we're engaging folks at that time? Is that too late? I mean, end of August, I know it's already second week of August, well, first week of August. But also just the strategy, these are really strange times. And if we've felt in the past that we haven't gotten enough saturation in the conversations, this year is going to be 10 times more difficult.
Absolutely, yeah. So that is also another reason why we wanted to issue these smaller RFPs, so that we can diversify our outreach and also methods. Given, this COVID environment, hosting in-person meetings is just not possible. So we have to get really creative. So we're looking to these outreach firms to see what kind of tools and services they can provide, given our limitations. And so, we won't be contracting with these firms until after this advisory board session meeting. So before we make these awards, we can definitely incorporate the feedback that we receive from the advisory board members to help guide which firms would be best suited for the outreach. So we will be sending out that email to advisory board members later this week. So if you are interested, definitely please let us know. And that time is flexible as well. So if evening meetings work best for everyone instead of during the work day, we can definitely discuss that.
I have a question about the RFP process. Is that going to existing outreach list serve, or is that broad?
It's going to the existing list right now. And I can actually send you that list, Kelly, if you're interested in seeing.
Sure. No, I was just a little bit curious. An idea, I guess, was about broadening that, because I'm not sure, obviously the people that we have on our list are on our list because we think they're great, right? But just kind of in this new environment, reaching a broader range of people might be something where like a small community group for $500 can get us the answers to our questions to a list or a group of people that may be a traditional outreach consulting firm.
I think Kelly is frozen.
I have a comment while Kelly is frozen. I kind of had brought this up initially when we kicked things off about, really taking the time to delve into these issues. Similar to Adrian, especially in light of that fair housing presentation, we need to now be intentional. Our timing, we're basically talking about trying to kicking the can down the road again if we follow this timeline. I think we need to ensure and be intentional that these fair housing measures and this historical legacy that has haunted our community is implemented. I also think it would be beneficial to the community members at all these outreach meetings to actually hear that presentation, to incorporate that as part of the agenda item before we start talking about anything. I don't even think we should be talking about allocation plan without first understanding how this new data is going to be incorporated into it. And I think the community actually even needs to hear that as well. So just some thoughts.
One thought that I'd like the committee, I think, to think about as it relates to this is, and when you talk to HR&A regarding basically the bylaws and what this committee is supposed to be doing, is in this 2-hour meeting from the beginning, we have started to structure it with you approving loans and the grant requests out of the different line items. That is not, as I said, legislated. The annual allocation plan is legislated. We started doing that because, you know, that's how the URA traditionally function. However, if this committee sees their role more as helping to craft policy and making sure that, you know, issues like the Fair Housing Partnership talked about today are addressed, you know, it might be that the time of this 2-hour meeting is better spent on those types of topics than you listening to loan underwriting staff talk about loans, but instead, you know, just dedicate that portion to the URA and our expertise and leave the 2 hours for more of the policy-wide discussions.
Well, I personally wouldn't necessarily say that, because I think the two are interconnected. You know, policy influences, you know, staff's, you know, decision making, et cetera. So I wouldn't say we want to not be a part of that process, because that's basically where the rubber meets the road on how these policies actually play out in real life. So I wouldn't want to not be a part of that. I'm saying we need to do both, but we need to spend a little more time on the front end, you know, on the policy side and the decision-making side.
Well, I think to piggyback that, implementation of policy is critical, and so I second Derek's opinion that we should be involved. But one idea that we had played around with pre-COVID, in the pre-COVID environment, which seems like an eternity ago, was doing rounds of funding so that we could really maybe have some deep dives on those types of talks, maybe quarterly, and not have to spend such a huge chunk of every meeting you know, hearing those presentations and going over that information. And if we could revisit that as part of our 2021 plan, I think that we'd be better off.
Or are there options for, you know, different mechanisms for voting on issues? I mean, is it sitting in a presentation like this, or is it getting that good, robust packet that everyone can come, you know, back to the URA with questions? Those can be circulated. You know, do we do electronic votes? And I'm not saying that that's always appropriate, but I think it's the mix of different ways that we engage each other, so that administrative items can have their due diligence, but then this policy conversation and implementation can also have its due diligence. And I apologize, I also have to leave the meeting, but I think that this is one of the more exciting conversations that we continue to have, and hopefully we can spend more time focused on this piece, because to your point, Jessica, I think absolutely this group is hungry for the policy piece, but we also don't want to short shrift any of the other conversations that we're having related to funding, to applications, to organizations and what their needs are. So if we can figure out some creative way to do it all, that would be fantastic.
Any other thoughts or comments? Okay. So, I mean, just, you know, stay tuned for more emails from us. Via email, I introduced Victoria Jackson. She's a new senior program assistant with the URA. You may be receiving emails from her or really from any of us, but myself, Fatina, or Jeremy, related to this annual allocation plan. So we'll just try to keep everybody in the loop as we move forward. Any other questions or concerns before we move on? Okay. Bettina, you want to show the expenditures to date?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll move through these pretty quickly because we have about 3 minutes left in the meeting. So this map, of course, is shows the impact of HOF programs throughout the city. As HOF and the impact of our programs continue to grow, if there is a different way the advisory board members would like to see this map and this data, please let me know. For example, we can break out development versus consumer programs just so that it's a little bit easier to see and decipher the programs. And for this slide, we had added an additional resource column, as you see. specifically to address HSP. So with HSP, we have the HOF funds and then the CDBG, corporate dollars, and then foundation dollars as well. So this chart really shows how fast and how quickly we're actually moving through HSP. We're a little over half committed on all of our HSP funding at this point. And so this chart just gives a good overview of how far we're going and how fast we're going, and to the point of the aggressive timeline for the 2021 annual allocation plan. You can see we're about 2/3 committed in HOF funding. So that's why it's really important that we get to council and the council vote by December in order to ensure that there aren't any gaps in program funding next year. But we are moving pretty quickly, I would say, through the funding being 2/3 committed.
And also, just real fast, you know, we added that additional resource to kind of highlight what's happening with HSP, because that's the primarily the COVID funding the city gave us, and a couple of foundations. But next month we will also update it to combine our CDBG and home resources for the rental gap program. You know, Kelly mentioned that we had talked about doing funding rounds, and you also may have noticed that you haven't seen any rental gap program awards come in front of you the last couple of months, and that's been because we are fully committed on the 2018 and 2019 RGP, and so it is our intent to do an RFP for HOF and CDBG and home resources for 2020 coming up soon. Probably by the end of September, that RFP will be released. So I will be reaching out to folks who would be interested in being on the committee to review the HOF request to the RGP line item. Okay, is this the last slide, Bettina? Here we go.
We have one more, so I'll go through this very, very quickly. And so this chart could actually address some of the data questions that were asked during public comment. So this chart does provide a breakdown of HOF programs by dollars and then unit amounts by the AMI level. So for example, HSP, you can see that there are over 700 households who are being served at the 30% AMI level or below. And then also we do know that a majority of the households that are enrolled in HSP are minority households and then women head of households as well. There was a huge increase from July's figures to August. HSP did increase by 500 households and about $1.5 million from July to August. This is due to increased demand and then also service providers getting caught up on invoices. But that really does highlight the need for this program right now, to see that huge increase of 500 households from one month to the other. And then also for HSP, there was an increase as well of about 107 households, which is pretty significant, about $3 million from last month to this month. Since HAP Plus was created, we've received about 70 applications, and about 52 of those households are currently in the process. And HAP Plus, again, is for households up to 80% AMI. So that has been a very popular program since its launched. Just the demand for home repairs has gone up since last month as well. We suspect it's potentially due to COVID and households needing to shelter in place in safe, habitable homes. And also just COVID has prompted homeowners to address these home repairs now versus later on down the line. But we are seeing like very significant increases in these consumer programs, and I think that we can really tie that to the environment that we're in right now. Jeremy, is there any additional comments you would like to add to this slide?
No, just building on what you said on the demand, Bettina, we're seeing about 40 to 50 applications coming in every month and continuing decline.
Just have a request. It's great to see this data, you know, in real time, situations. But if we could also see the demographic data in real time, so we can actually understand, you know, what's happening connected to the fair housing conversation as well in real time. So demographically, race, etc.
Sure, we can work on a demographic slide that we can show at each meeting.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
The slide that has the pins with the maps, is there any way that that's the slides really jumbled up, and I think you mentioned that. Is there any way it could be broken out? I mean, I know that it's color-based, but if it was just like one per each program, I mean, I know that it's a lot, but I mean, it would allow at least people to see, because it just looks like a whole bunch of colors, and it shows a lot of impact, but it's, that's just my thought, so.
I would be interested in seeing it broken down between rental programs and homeowner programs, so we can see kind of where we're providing like a, more permanent wealth building opportunities for folks. I'd be really interested in that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll work on that.
And some of the colors selected look so similar. It's you're not seeing the true change. So maybe a way to highlight the color differences a little bit more, so that it really stands out.
Sure. I mean, really, it's just showing that, especially the housing stabilization program and the homeowner assistance program, I mean, the numbers we're hitting are really high at this point. So I think we, all should collectively be, proud of that, and understanding too that there is geographic distribution for most of these programs. Any other questions or comments? The next meeting is September. It's always hard to say, but at this point, I think it's pretty safe to say we will be doing that one online again. So September 3rd at 9 a.m. via the city's YouTube channel, and the same link we used today, but I'll be emailing out the link again next month. Any other questions before I ask for a motion for adjournment? And here's just a reminder. Everyone interested in HSP should continue to call 211 for rental assistance and for mortgage assistance. Also, just want to re-emphasize that with the city giving us the CDBG COVID funding, not only was that able to help with the rental assistance, but $1 million of that money went directly for mortgage assistance. So if you are a homeowner in the city of Pittsburgh who's struggling to pay their mortgage due to COVID-related loss of income, you can actually call and enroll in this program before you enter into default, and get the official letter from your bank. You can call and try to get into this program. So please call 211 and ask for the housing stabilization program for homeowners if that is indeed the case. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Kelly, second. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
That's knowledge. Does everyone agree?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I hope everybody has a good Thursday afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.